Long ago, before the world we know took shape, there were lives, whispers, and footsteps lost to time. Not the kings, not the conquerors, but the quiet ones. Tonight, we walk with them through the forgotten corners of history.
In the heart of Japan, nestled between ridges covered in pine, there are quiet valleys where fog lingers long after the morning sun has risen. The wind here does not rush. It moves gently through the trees, rustling the tips of cedar branches, and sometimes it carries a memory, a breath of a world long gone, a whisper of steps that once moved without sound. This is where they lived, not in castles, not in caves or hidden fortresses, but in homes like any other, tucked into sloping hillsides where the soil was dark and the silence was deep. These were the provinces of Iga and Koga, remote, difficult to reach, with roads that twisted like brush strokes across a scroll. Here, in these places, far from the capitals, a different kind of life took root. Not of warriors in gleaming armor, but of farmers, craftsmen, messengers, observers. Some of them were shinobi. We call them ninja now, but they never called themselves that. Their lives were not loud, their movements not heroic. They did not announce their presence, even to time itself. To understand the ninja, we must begin not with action, but with stillness. Let us walk, then, softly, through the quiet mountains that bore them. There is something about Iga. The terrain resists conquest. The ridges run like walls between valleys. The trees grow thick, even now. In ancient times, the central Japanese government often struggled to control this region. It was remote, distant from the centers of power in Nara and Kyoto. Difficult to patrol, difficult to rule. This made Iga different. Villages here became self-reliant. They formed their own councils, clans of families who watched over each other. They were not samurai. They owed no feudal lord. Instead, they were independent. And with independence came quiet knowledge. Knowledge of paths through the forest that no outsider knew. Knowledge of plants that healed or poisoned. Knowledge of how to move without leaving a trace. Here, discretion was survival. And so, over generations, certain families began to specialize, not in open war, but in the art of subtlety. They were not unlike their neighbors. They lived in wooden homes, simple, small, a single room where families slept close to the fire, the smell of cedar smoke in every blanket, rice porridge cooking over embers in the early hours. Children played in the fields, chickens clucked in the yard. The rhythm of life was humble, unremarkable, but if you looked closer, you might notice that the walls were thicker in one room, or that a ladder led to a space beneath the floor, or that a young man who worked as a potter sometimes left before dawn and came back after nightfall, covered in dust but without his pots. These homes were shelters, yes, but also training grounds, and sometimes staging grounds. To be shinobi was not to be separate from society. It was to live within it, as a thread, not a knot. One day you might be a farmer, the next a messenger, the next a silent watcher outside a border town, but always you returned home. Always you were a son, a daughter, a husband, a wife. The shinobi were part of the community. They helped with the harvest. They repaired fences. They told stories around the fire. And when they were called upon, they vanished, but only for a while. Then, quietly, as if nothing had passed, they returned to the rhythms of daily life. The land itself shaped the shinobi. To live in Iga was to learn patience. The mountains do not hurry. The seasons come as they always have, one step at a time. Children were taught to walk without sound, to listen to the forest as if it were speaking directly to them, to find trails in the underbrush that no road ever marked. A misplaced footstep, a broken twig, could betray you, but a breath held at the right moment could save a life. Even today, you can find these trails, worn not by boots, but by bare feet and time. Winding paths that the shinobi once walked, not to attack, but to observe. The late 15th century was a time of turbulence in Japan. The Ashikaga shogunate was weakening. Power shifted between clans. Civil war was no longer the exception, but the rule. And so, even in Iga, even in Koga, the call for information grew louder. Samurai fought with blades, but daimyo began to realize the value of whispers. And those whispers were bought in the mountains. But the shinobi did not fight for glory, nor did they kill for pleasure. Often, their missions were about listening, watching, reporting. Their success was silence. If a castle never fell because an ambush was avoided, a shinobi might have been there, but no one would know. The knowledge of the shinobi was passed quietly, from father to son, from mother to daughter. Not through scrolls, but through routine. How to tie a knot that would not slip. How to hold your breath for 60 heartbeats. How to step without leaving footprints on soft ground. There were scrolls, yes, some have survived. But most of the training lived in the body, in repetition, in memory. There were no schools, only homes. And within those homes, a quiet discipline, a whisper, a glance, a nod. The shinobi learned not only how to vanish, but when to remain. And that choice was the heart of their power. Today, you can still visit the valleys of Iga and Koga. The mist still clings to the same trees. The rivers still trace the same paths. But the silence is different. The homes have been restored, the stories preserved, and yet something is missing. Not because it was lost, but because it was never meant to be seen. The shinobi were never meant to be remembered as individuals. No statues, no epic tales, only the mountains remain. And in their stillness, you might still hear them. Not the clang of weapons, not the thrill of chase, but the soft breath of a watcher, half a world away, waiting, always waiting. Long before the sky brightens, while the moon is still low over the horizon, a quiet household stirs. In the small wooden homes of Iga and Koga, life begins not with alarm, but with rhythm. The fire is stirred back to life from glowing embers. The air is cold even in summer, and so the mother kneels by the hearth, hands practiced and steady. She prepares a pot of okayu, rice porridge, simple warming, humble. There is no rush, no voices raised, only the creak of wood, the pop of coals, and the soft hush of steam rising. The children begin to wake, not all at once, and not with laughter or games, but with a slow, sleepy awareness. Another day begins, just like the last. And yet, no day is ever quite the same.
A shinobi family eats together. Not every member is a shinobi, not in name, but everyone knows. Everyone plays a part. The eldest son, who will inherit the craft. The mother, who knows more about herbs than the apothecary. The grandfather, who seems slow, but whose memory is razor sharp. Even the youngest daughter, watching, always watching. Breakfast is quiet. Bowls of porridge with pickled plum. Green tea, steeped carefully in clay cups. Dried fish if it was a good month. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is hurried. The father eats last. He has already been up, walking the perimeter of the house, checking the knots in the storage ropes, listening to the birds. He knows what kind of morning it will be, based on the songs of sparrows. After the morning meal, the home becomes a gentle machine. Tools are sharpened, ashes are swept, shoji screens are checked for gaps. A boy gathers fallen branches for kindling. He tests the weight of each one in his palm, not just for burning, but for balance, for use as a staff, should the need arise. A girl gathers water from the stream. She walks barefoot, not because she must, but because she is learning the land by feel. The mother grinds herbs into a paste. The pestle is worn smooth. She hums a song with no words. Every movement in the home has layers. Every task is both what it is and something else. Sweeping teaches footwork. Cooking teaches timing. Gardening teaches patience. And every moment teaches silence. By mid-morning, the younger ones go into the woods, not to train, not openly. This is not a martial arts school. There are no kiais, no uniforms, no trophies. Instead, there is play. They balance along fallen logs. They hide behind trees and listen for footsteps. They try to mimic the call of a bird. The older children teach the younger. They do not call it instruction, but that's what it is. One boy walks blindfolded from tree to tree. He counts steps by feel. He avoids branches by memory. He laughs only once when he stumbles into a fox's den. Even their games are quiet. In the shadows of the forest, the shinobi train their bodies by pretending not to. By midday, chores and play are done. There is rest now. Some nap in the shade. Some meditate. Some simply sit. To sit is a skill in itself. To sit without impatience. To sit and feel the breeze move through your clothes. To hear every bird call and know which ones belong. The father sharpens a blade, not with urgency, but with devotion. Not every blade is a weapon. A sickle is for harvesting. A knife is for carving. A needle is for sewing, and sometimes for saving a life. The grandfather tells a story, but never the same story twice. He adjusts it, like a map, depending on who is listening. He speaks of a friend who once disguised himself as a traveling monk, who crossed 3 provinces and returned with nothing but a riddle. He says that riddle saved 100 lives. Then he sips his tea and says no more. After rest, there is learning.
scrolls are brought out, but only for a short time. Their pages are fragile. Their words are not meant to last forever, only long enough to remember. One scroll shows how to tie 12 different knots. Another shows how to make a simple ladder from vines. A third has a map, but no landmarks, only rhythms. "The rhythm of this valley," the father says, tapping the paper, "is more useful than a road." One child asks about poisons. The mother does not scold. Instead, she teaches the names of 5 plants, 3 that heal, 1 that numbs, and 1 that never leaves the body. She does not say which is which. That part must be learned in time. By late afternoon they walk, not to go anywhere, but to practice how to go. A man walking through town in a hurry is remembered. A man walking slowly is watched. A man walking with no particular rhythm at all is forgotten. So they walk, each member of the family taking a different path, some barefoot, some in straw sandals, each moving in silence, each observing without being observed. They nod to neighbors, they carry baskets, they seem ordinary, but all the while they are measuring distance, counting windows, mocking the squeaky gate, noting which dog barks and which one doesn't. It is not paranoia, it is preparation.
As the sky begins to fade from pale gold to indigo, the family gathers once again. Dinner is more generous than breakfast, but still simple. Rice, broth, pickled vegetables, dried fish. They do not speak of missions. They do not speak of weapons. They speak of the weather, of a neighbor's new roof, of the strange man who passed through the village last week. They speak in layers. The fire burns low. The night insects sing. And gradually, the children fall asleep. Not in beds. There are none. Only futons, rolled out onto the floor, still warm from the day. The parents watch the embers fade. They say nothing. They don't need to. But not everyone sleeps. Each night, one member stays awake. Sometimes the eldest son. Sometimes the grandmother. Even the youngest girl, when she is ready. She lights no lantern. She walks the perimeter of the house. She listens to the night wind. She knows the sounds of the frogs, of the trees, of the creek. And she listens for anything that does not belong, not because danger is near, but because one day it might be. She returns just before dawn. She does not speak of what she saw. She simply nods and goes to sleep. And the cycle begins again. To live as a shinobi is to live deeply inside the ordinary, to prepare for everything while appearing prepared for nothing. It is not a life of violence, nor is it one of peace. It is a life of attention, of discipline, of waiting. It is a life where every motion has purpose, where every silence is filled with meaning, and above all, it is a life of stillness.
When we think of the ninja, we imagine weapons, shuriken flashing through the dark, hidden blades tucked into sleeves, explosives perhaps. But in truth, the most valuable tools of the shinobi made no sound. In a simple home lit by a single oil lamp, a man kneels beside a wooden box. Inside are not swords or armor, but things far more ordinary. A pair of sandals with unusually thick soles, a tightly wound cord, a small wooden flask, a length of dark cloth. These are tools not of attack, but of movement, not of battle, but of blending in. The flask holds oil, not to burn, but to darken the skin. The cloth soaked in vinegar can obscure scent. The cord used to climb or tie is soft to the touch and coiled without knots. Even the sandals matter. Their design is chosen so that the wearer leaves no clear footprint. To move unseen,
one must first understand what makes one seen. And so the shinobi prepared not only to fight, but to disappear. One of the most essential shinobi tools was not carried. It was worn. Dark clothing, yes, but not black, as legends suggest. In truth, black draws the eye. The shinobi preferred soft browns, grays, and faded blues, colors that matched the soil, the trees, the shadows cast by dusk. A young man kneels in his room. He folds his clothing carefully, wrapping each piece in cloth to prevent sound. He checks the seams. The stitching is loose by design, so the garment will tear away if caught. Every layer has a reason. The outer coat is made of soft hemp, the inner layer of cotton. Breathable, silent, replaceable. Even his movements are deliberate, slow, practiced. He opens a small pouch. Inside are tiny caltrops, handmade, rusted to blend with the soil. He pours them into a second pouch, wraps it in cloth, and ties it to his sash. Nothing clicks, nothing clinks. Every item has been wrapped, muffled, silenced. Not all tools were defensive. Some were functional, elegant in their simplicity. The shinobi kumade, a small claw-like rake, was one such tool. Used for climbing, it looked like a child's toy, but in the hands of a trained user, it could catch a roof edge or tree limb with precision. Light, easy to carry, and often disguised as part of a walking stick. In the mountains of Iga, a young shinobi practices with one. He throws the rope softly, the rake catching the branch above. He climbs, not quickly, but smoothly, careful of creaks, of snapping bark. From above, the village below looks ordinary, but for the shinobi, it is a map. Every roof an entry point, every shadow a path, every well a potential escape. Tools like the kumade were not about confrontation. They were about access, about choice. The shinobi were masters of misdirection. Sometimes their tools created illusions, not to frighten, but to distract. They carried eggshells filled with fine powders, pepper, ash, or even finely ground glass. When thrown, they created bursts of confusion, enough to disappear. A boy crouches by the hearth. He carefully scrapes soot into a paper envelope. Next to him, his sister folds eggshells, each one emptied and dried. They work in silence, hands practiced. Elsewhere, another shinobi stirs a clay pot over low heat. He adds pine resin and crushed leaves, a mixture that, when burned, creates thick smoke with little flame. This is not magic, it is chemistry, passed down through families tested over time. A tool does not need to be deadly to be powerful. It only needs to buy you one moment. And in that moment, a life can be spared. Perhaps the greatest tool of the shinobi was not physical at all. It was the art of becoming someone else. Disguise was not deception, it was survival. A shinobi could become a monk, a traveling merchant, a performer, a pilgrim. They studied speech, dress, posture, the way each group walked, sat, bowed. A young woman stands before a mirror polished from bronze. She adjusts her scarf, then her sleeves. She walks across the room, then again, this time with shorter steps, then again, hunched slightly, head bowed. Her mother watches silently, then nods. Elsewhere, an older man removes the blade from his walking stick. He places it carefully in a hidden groove in the doorframe. He may not need it, but it will be there. To be shinobi was to leave nothing to chance, to prepare 100 tools so that 99 could be left behind. Only the one you needed would matter.
Before we speak of training, we must speak of the mountain. Because in Iga and Koga, the mountains were not background. They were participants in life. Each slope, each ridge, held lessons older than memory. Each path told a story, not in words, but in rhythm, in silence. The terrain of Iga was not soft. It was not easily tamed. Narrow ridges, sudden drops, forest so thick that even sunlight moved slowly through it. And yet, people thrived here, not by conquering the land, but by listening to it. To live in these valleys was to rise with the mist, to wake not to the sound of alarm, but to the hush of breath through branches. In the morning, elders swept the path in front of their homes, not to tidy, but to read the earth. A bent blade of grass, a shifted stone, a mark in the moss, all could mean someone had passed. And so the mountain taught first not how to hide, but how to see. Shinobi training did not begin with weapons. It began with steps. Children were taught to walk barefoot through the woods. Not to rush, not to stomp, to step and listen, to pause and feel. A dry leaf crushed underfoot meant the step was careless. A snapped twig meant you had not read the path. There were games, yes, but quiet ones. A leaf balanced on the head, a foot race over moss where no mark was to be left. The forest floor was not an obstacle course. It was a test of awareness. One story tells of a boy sent into the woods to fetch water. He returned with the pail half full and mud on his sleeve. His grandfather said nothing, only pointed to the sleeve and said softly, "Did the river give permission for your elbow?" Discipline was in details. For the shinobi, nature was not romantic. It was practical. Trees, for example, were not just landmarks. They were calendars. The way moss grew told direction. The season of bark peeling told time. The calls of birds warned of others nearby. The silence of birds warned of even more. A stream's bend could indicate an underground shelter. The smell of a flower might mean a certain root grew nearby, one useful for medicine. Everything in the landscape could be read, if you were patient enough. And so, training was not loud, not dramatic. It was the study of the ordinary, until it revealed the hidden. Young shinobi would sit by a tree for hours, not meditating, just observing. And in that stillness, a lesson would come. Not from a teacher, not from a scroll, but from the land itself. There were no maps drawn for shinobi paths. They were walked, remembered. Each family had routes known only to them, a twist in a stream that led to a covered gully, a narrow pass between two cedars that allowed a silent exit. Children followed their elders each season, not to be shown, but to repeat, until the paths lived in the soles of their feet. There is an old saying in Iga, the tree does not ask for a name to give you shade. The land did not boast, it gave.
if you listened. Some shinobi were said to walk from Iga to Kyoto and back, unseen, not by running, but by knowing. And knowing took time. Mountains do not hurry. They change, but not quickly. And so shinobi training followed that rhythm, a lesson repeated not once, but 100 times. Not until success, but until silence. A jump practiced until the sound of landing disappeared. A breath practiced until the chest rose invisibly. No praise was given, no punishment dealt, only the mountain's rhythm and your own. There was comfort in this, a kind of peace, because when the body moves with purpose, without thought, it does not panic, it survives. This was not the training of warriors, it was the shaping of watchers, the building of stillness within a moving world. Even now, in Iga and Koga, the forests remain, the ridges still rise like waves frozen in stone. Not a spirit, but a memory embedded in bark, in root, in trail. The shinobi are no longer here, but their teachers remain. And perhaps, if you pause, if you listen, you will hear what they heard. Not a voice, not a command, but a whisper. Stillness is strength. We often imagine weapons as loud, clashing swords, arrows loosed, armor clanking over stone. But the tools of the shinobi were designed not for noise, but for absence. Absence of alarm, absence of light, absence of trace. The most effective tool was the one never seen. The most successful mission was the one no one knew happened. And so their tools reflected this truth. Not grand, not ornate, but humble, ingenious, whisper light. A length of rope coiled beneath a robe, a small saw hidden in a sleeve, a pair of ashiko, climbing claws, worn like sandals, used to scale trees and walls without leaving footprints. These were not battlefield weapons. They were instruments of passage, of access, of evasion. Every piece had a purpose, and every purpose served silence. One of the most iconic tools was not a blade, it was cloth. The shinobi zukin, a mask or head wrap, concealed the face, yes, but more than that, it erased identity. Not just for disguise, but for discipline. To put on the mask was to become no one. No family, no name, only the task. These wraps were often dyed with natural pigments, mulberry, charcoal, indigo, colors that blended into earth and night. In stillness, the shinobi could vanish into tree bark, into thatch, into rock. The mask was a signal, but not to others, to the self. You are now unseen. Move accordingly. Some tools were used not to strike, but to redirect, to draw the eye away, to confuse, to escape. Small pellets of black powder wrapped in rice paper could create a flash or a burst of smoke. These were not battlefield explosives. They were distractions. A moment of blindness in moonlight. A moment of sound where there should be none. And then the shinobi would be gone. Even simpler tricks existed. A coin tossed into the brush to make a rustle. A trail of animal prints drawn with carved wooden soles. Some shinobi carried caltrops, small spiked tools dropped behind them to deter pursuers. Others carried bells, not to ring, but to leave behind in a false camp. The idea was not to confront, it was to mislead. A weapon that led the enemy left, while you went right. Perhaps the greatest tool of the shinobi was not held, it was worn. It was the body itself, conditioned, tuned,
disciplined, to carry oneself without effort, to breathe shallowly, evenly, to hold still for hours without muscle cramp. The shinobi trained their joints to move without cracking, their feet to land softly, their hands to feel in the dark without knocking objects. Even posture was practiced to seem like a traveler or a peasant or a shadow. The clothes, too, mattered. Loose enough to move, tight enough not to snag. Multiple pockets sewn into the inner robe, quiet fabrics, reinforced stitching, no medals, no symbols, nothing that clanged. The entire body became a vessel of silence.
Communication was another art entirely. In a world without phones or secure networks, messages had to travel by hand. But hands could be cut off, so the shinobi found ways to write invisibly. Lemon juice mixed with water, applied with a reed pen, would vanish once dry. The message appeared only when warmed by a flame. Some scrolls were written in codes known only within a clan. Others were tiny, concealed inside bamboo tubes or hollowed-out tools. One technique involved writing a message on rice paper, dissolving it in tea, and drinking it. The message was memorized. The paper? Gone. They did not trust ink alone. They trusted memory and silence. A soft drizzle pattering against tiled rooftops. Distant temple bells echo through a humid summer night. Footsteps on wet stone. The flicker of lanterns behind shoji screens. A muffled voice. Then silence. Kyoto, a city of nobles, merchants, monks, and messengers. A place where everything seen was often not what it seemed. The capital was a world of performance. Fans unfolded with purpose. Words were chosen like blades. Even the way one bowed could signal allegiance or insult. For the shinobi, this was not enemy territory. It was a stage, and on that stage, they did not dress in black. They dressed in silk, in merchants' robes, in pilgrims' wraps, in the uniform of a courier or a monk. Because to walk unseen in the city was not to vanish into shadow. It was to blend into candlelight. They listened in tea houses, delivered scrolls in the palace, lit incense in temples, all while gathering whispers like threads. In war, swords win battles. In politics, words win wars. Information was the blade the shinobi carried most often, and the capital was full of it. An overheard argument in a nobleman's house, a pattern of comings and goings at a certain gate, a poem recited at a gathering that hid a threat in metaphor. To the careless ear, it was gossip. To the trained ear, it was gold. A shinobi might work for a daimyo in Iga, but in Kyoto, they gathered information for all sides, sometimes even delivering one clan's secrets to another for a fee, sometimes choosing silence because knowledge, like a blade, must be unsheathed only when it is useful. Unlike the mountains of Iga, the capital had no ridgelines to follow, but it had rhythm. Markets opened at sunrise. Temples held prayers at dusk. Couriers changed routes on the third day of the month. The shinobi memorized these patterns. They moved through alleys no one noticed, slept in hostels near checkpoints, left messages behind loose stones at garden walls.
Every festival was an opportunity, every storm an advantage. And, like in the wilds, their goal was not conquest, it was understanding. The city was no less alive than the forest. It had breath and silence and secrets. You only needed to listen.
In the capital, noticing was everything. A servant leaving late with dust on their knees might suggest a hidden tunnel. A missing bowl from a set of 5 could mean a guest stayed uninvited. A footprint in a garden might belong to someone who had no reason to be barefoot. These were not details, they were signals. The shinobi trained to notice what others dismissed, to see what others called coincidence, to hear intent behind laughter. Sometimes they would follow a man not for what he carried, but for what he didn't. Sometimes a silence told more than a shout. The art of noticing was not only observation, it was restraint. To see without reacting, to learn without interfering. And then, when the time was right, to act without being seen. Not every shinobi mission in the capital involved climbing rooftops or vanishing in the mist. Some required years of preparation. A shinobi might pose as a merchant for 5 seasons. Open a real business, sell real goods, make real connections. All the while, their true task was observation. Or perhaps they became a monk, traveled, meditated, preached, and in doing so, mapped hidden travel routes, tracked army movements, or carried coded messages. These were not performances, they were lives, and in living them, the shinobi learned not only about others, but about themselves. Because in becoming so many things, you begin to ask, who am I when I am not playing a role? Not every mission ended in silence. Sometimes, a message needed to be delivered quickly, a betrayal exposed, a fire set in the right place at the right hour. These moments were rare, but when they came, the shinobi moved with purpose. No hesitation, no display, only action. And even then, the goal was not glory, it was disappearance. In the stories told in taverns, a thief vanished in the wind. In rumors whispered by guards, a shadow slipped through the barracks. But in truth, it was planning, it was patience, and a silence broken only when absolutely necessary. A steady rain, tapping on old roof tiles. Crickets in the underbrush. A distant owl calling once. Then a long silence, unbroken, expectant. Before there were spies, there were watchers, not warriors in armor, not monks in robes, but farmers with steady eyes, children who learned not to speak when footsteps passed near, mothers who never asked why a son returned without his tools. The watcher did not seek drama, they did not chase conflict. They waited. In the stillness of twilight, at the edge of the woods, a watcher could observe without ever being seen. A merchant's cart arriving late. A letter exchanged beneath a lantern. A gate opened when it should have remained closed. The power was in knowing, not acting. Not yet. A shinobi's training did not begin with weapons. It began with noticing. Where birds landed, where moss grew, how footsteps changed when someone was tired or nervous. The art of observation was not a moment, it was a lifestyle. Children were taught to memorize landscapes, to watch faces in the market without staring. This was not magic, It was muscle. Repetition turned attention into instinct. Silence became a tool sharper than steel. In the mountain homes of Iga, it was said that the best listeners heard what was never spoken. Tone mattered more than volume. Even the sound of rain on leaves could tell a story. If the rhythm changed, something had moved. If the insects went silent, someone was near. To be a shinobi was to listen with your whole being, not just ears, but breath, skin, memory. At night, many trained by sitting in darkness for hours, waiting to hear the single creak in a floorboard 2 rooms away, or the sigh of someone who thought they were alone.
Modern life pulls us away from the moment, from the place, from each other. But the shinobi lived fully in each breath. They were trained to feel the weight of a footstep, to sense when a shadow moved just slightly against the flow of the wind. They did not multitask. They focused. When planting rice, they planted rice. When walking a path, they saw every bend before they reached it. To live like a watcher is not to be afraid. It is to be alert, softly, without tension. To blend with the world by becoming part of its rhythm. A shinobi could wait days for a single action. And when the time came, it lasted seconds. But it was never rushed. Never sloppy. Even motion was trained. The arc of a gesture. The sound of clothing shifting. The pace of a breath taken mid-stride. Some say they moved like ghosts, but they were flesh and blood. What made them invisible was not magic. It was timing. To move when no one looked. To pass through when attention was elsewhere. To act, not with force, but with certainty. We live in a world of bright lights, of noise, of declarations. But somewhere in the valleys of Iga, in the hills of Koga, the Watcher's way remains. Not in a weapon, not in a scroll, but in the memory of how to be present, to see, to listen, to wait, and in doing so, to know. This was their true art, not vanishing, but watching, with open eyes and absolute stillness. When a blade strikes, the world hears it. But when a whisper survives centuries, that is the work of silence. The shinobi, the real ones, never sought legend, and yet their images traveled across time, distorted, dramatized, adorned with smoke and steel. But beneath the myth, something remains. Not the throwing stars, not the massed leaps across rooftops, but the quiet practices of observation, the discipline of restraint, the art of being present without being seen. In Iga and Koga, those practices did not vanish when the wars ended. They changed form. They became family teachings, passed down not as weapons, but as wisdom. The way to listen to a room, the importance of timing, the knowledge of the land beneath one's feet. To disappear was not to escape. It was to choose when to act, when to hold, when to let the world pass by while you remain motionless.
knowing more for your silence than any speech could offer. This is the opposite of what the world now celebrates. We reward the loud, the fast, the seen, but the legacy of the shinobi asks a different question. What is the value of being invisible? For some, it was safety. For others, strategy. For a few, survival. But for all, it was freedom. Long after the height of the shinobi's work had passed, families in the mountain valleys still taught their children the quiet arts, not as preparation for infiltration, but as a way of living. Move with intention. See before you are seen. Speak only what is needed. In times of peace, those lessons became philosophy. They showed up in poetry, in ink painting, in the careful way a home was cleaned.
A culture shaped not only by war, but by watchfulness. Even now, a grandmother might teach her grandson how to sit still for hours, listening to the wind. Not because danger is near, but because listening itself is a form of respect. While the true shinobi faded into their villages, their image did not. Travelers told stories. Actors played roles on the kabuki stage. Woodblock prints showed leaping figures dressed in black, clutching swords and fire. During the Edo period, when peace became the norm, the idea of the ninja became entertainment. Later still, it crossed oceans into comics, cartoons, films. The silence became spectacle. The truth became shadowed by fantasy. And yet, some fragments remained. A technique embedded in a martial art, a proverb passed from teacher to student, a trail that still winds through forested hills. The myth may have grown too large, but the seed inside it is still real.
In Iga today, you can take a train to the Ninja Museum. You can walk through recreated homes, handle tools that mimic those once used. Some may scoff, some smile. But if you walk the mountains alone, if you stop long enough, you may notice something else. That the quiet still teaches. That there is value in pausing before you speak. In watching the path, not just rushing along it. In choosing presence over performance. The shinobi may be gone, but their legacy is not. It lives in silence, in awareness, in the moments between.